Okay, and welcome to Unit 2B. In this particular program, we're going to discuss simple Boolean subtract using primitives to attempt to modify a primitive into a useful object. And we'll show you how you can also use the panels in Modeler to have very tight control over how you do this. And this will be a very interesting exercise if you're just getting started with this to see how this works. Okay, here we are again in Modeler. And right now we have a completely empty field, and so what we're going to do first is we're going to start with a square. What we're going to create here is a die. So once again we're in Create tab, and we're going to go into the primitive section, and a die is essentially a box. So we will draw a box. So the top menu basically shows you the top of the box, and this is looking at, from our point of view, the front, looking towards the back of the workshop. And so if you look over here in perspective view, you can see we have not really a cube, but we'll fix that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit the N key to get our numeric panel open, because we want to make sure that this box actually works. And so the first thing we're going to do is to turn it into an actual cube so that it can be used as a die. So you see length, width, and depth, and I'm going to make all of those say 5. So 5, I'm just going to hit the tab key, 5, 5. So now we have, from perspective view, we can see we have a perfect cube. And we're also going to go here and we're going to center it so that we can work on it very exactly. So I'm going to go into the center area, and I'm just going to put 0, tab, 0, tab, 0, tab. And this will put that cube right in the center of the workshop. Okay, so in this particular case, if you look at the cube, you'll notice that it has razor sharp edges. And so if we're going to do this as a die, kind of like the die that you would play with a dice game or something like that, you'd want those edges to be rounded. Now there's several ways you can do that, but the easiest way that we've been given in this particular primitive is right here under radius and radius segments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the regular segments just all ones, so we won't have any extra geometry on the faces of the die, but we will put a radius here at the very top. We're going to give that some depth, and as you can see, as I do that, if I expand that, you can see what it does. It actually creates a kind of a bevel there. If you look at the die, you can see that the edges are now suddenly rounded in a very geometrical way, which may be useful to us, but what I want to do is I want to make it look like a natural smoothing process. So if we go back to numeric pad, I'm going to increase the number of segments. Now this actually adds geometry. What it's doing is it's creating a lot of small flat shapes. If we zoom in on this, we can begin to see them again, like little bitty ridges and ripples. It creates a lot of small polygons that give the effect of a rounded shape. And for our purposes here, that's going to be good enough. Okay, so there we have our die. Now right now this would be not a particularly useful die to play with because it has no spots on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually carve in the spots. And this will show you how the various screens are going to be very useful to you in helping you do this. I'm going to turn off numeric pad right now, and I'm going to turn off box. And so what we want to do is we want to create the perfect spot. And I'm going to do this on the next layer. So I'm going to go up here and hit the second layer. So now we see nothing in the universe, but I'm going to put the first layer in the background. So I'm going to go to layer 1 here and click the lower part of it there. And there we can see a ghost version of this layer here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a spot. A spot in this particular case will be a hemisphere. So instead of box, I'm going to create ball as a primitive. And I'm going to go right into the center, looking at the top view, and I'm going to draw a ball. And let's say we want to make it just like that. We don't want to make it too big, because if the spots get too big, then they won't all fit. And then down here, of course, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit like that. Now, since you can do it by eye, but it's probably not perfect, so I'm going to go back to the numeric pad by hitting the N key, and you'll see that we have radius. Now, it just so happens I was almost perfect. We have 500 millimeters and 550 for one of them, so I'm just going to grab that one and make that 500 as well. See, it made some little difference. So now we have a perfect sphere as our spot. Now, if you look at it in perspective view, you'll see that that sphere is in the center of the die. Now, that's not going to be particularly useful. So what we're going to do, first of all, I'm going to turn off ball because we're done with that. I want to be able to move that as a cutting tool. So looking at it from above, now this is important. If I go over here to modify and I go to move, if I were to move this from this perspective, I'm going to put this, looking at the top of it, I'm going to sort of line this up with the edge of that shape. Now, from this window, we can see the ball is lined up with the edge. With this window, it is not, because looking at it head on, we haven't really moved it. So it's still considered in the center of the box, but if I want to, I can line that up. So if this is the number 1 spot, I'm going to put that right in the center. You see, if I had it off to the side, it would be off to the side up here, but towards the front. So I can move it very easily, laterally, and so looking at this face of the die, I now have a spot. So what I'm going to do then, I don't even have to turn off move to do this. I'm going to carve that into the die. So if I go back to layer 1, click on layer 1, now the spot disappears. I put the spot in the background, and then if I go to construct and I go to Boolean and I hit the Boolean Subtract, it does the appropriate math, and there it is. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to go over here to 1 so we don't no longer see the background image, and I'm going to zoom in on that, and you can see that we have carved a spot into the die. Now at this stage, I'm going to do something that's going to be useful to us later. What I'm going to do is I'm going to establish a surface. So if I go in onto this area, what I'm going to do, I'm going to select polygon mode, and I'm going to draw around this. So you see that picks up all the polygons that are making up the spot. Notice it does not affect the rest of the die. So if I go back here, it doesn't do it. So then I'm going to go into change surface, and I'm going to call this surface spot. And I'm going to go to the color of the surface, and I'm going to make it a black spot. Right now that's all I have to do, a black spot, and I'm just going to hit OK, and there it is. So if I deselect this, you can see that the spot is black. Okay, so then I back up from this a little bit. Notice we're still in basically the same place. We haven't moved the actual cube any. But now what I want to do, and this is going to make it a little more interesting, is I want to make the second face of the dice. Now, I suppose I could go to the regulations and look exactly where the spots are supposed to be, but I'm kind of going to make it up as I go around. So I'm going to go to the second layer and put the first layer in the background. And I'm just going to take the very same spot, and I'm going to modify move back here, and I'm going to move it upwards like so. And so ultimately what I want to do, and I can use the grid here to kind of get an idea where that would be if I'm going to make that for the number 2 position. And to save a little bit of time here, I'm going to turn off move, and I'm going to duplicate that spot. So edit copy and edit paste. Then if I go back to move, you'll see I can actually create the second spot at the same time. So if I line those two up there, if you look at it over here, you see that those are now pretty close to where they should be. I'll turn off move, deselect this one. Then if I go and do the same thing, go to the main window and then put this in the background, construct, and I go to Boolean Subtract, and lo and behold, now we have the 2 spots. So then, and it's going to get a little bit more difficult as we go along, I'm going to do the same thing I did previously, select those 2 spots, go to change surface, And spot's already selected, so I'm going to hit OK. So then, if you look at this, if I deselect this, it's easier to see. Now I got the 2 spots there. Now we'll do just a little bit more. Let's say that then I want to make, let's say, the 3 position. So I put that in the foreground and that in the background. And in this particular case, I go to Modify, Move, and let's say it just happens to be convenient for me to move these downward. And so there, I now have the dice lined up in the 3 position. And if you look at it from the top, it's lining up with the top side of the die. Notice if you look over here, you can see these are very different. Now here you can't see the difference, but we're going to use that to our advantage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off Move, select one of these, edit Copy, edit Paste, turn on Move again, and if I move that over here, let's say that that's close enough, like that. So turn off Move, and I do that. And once again, if I go over to here, put that in the background, construct, Boolean Subtract. And once again, I now have more spots carved in the die. So if I go here, I'm going to do the same trick. Going to select all of those surfaces and change surface, spot, it's already selected. Then I deselect those, and now I have the 3. Now we'll do at least one more. So let's say that we wanted to work on one of these other sides here. So let's say we want to take the 1 here, and we want to turn that into a 4. So what I would do then is I would go into the second layer here, is I'm going to find the easiest way to select those. Now if I try to select it here, it's going to bump into that one. So I'm just going to select this one, almost at random, and I'm going to go to Modify, Move, and I'm going to put that one over here. Now notice when I do that, I can only see it on the line here. Now I can do it for the other ones too if I want to. If it's easier to do it that way, what I'll do is I'll turn off Move, deselect this one, select this one because it's easier to see on this window, Move, and not from up here but from down here. Actually I could do it either way. I'm just going to put that there about where it's got to be. Turn off Move, deselect it here because it's easier to deselect here. And now I can select this one, no longer matters where that is, and I move that over to here. So then, as you can see, looking up here is kind of a jumbled mess, but looking over here now, suddenly it's starting to make a little bit more sense. So let's say that I were to assume this is going to be the 4, and I'm going to move that into that area there. Then I can turn off Move, select this one. Oh, deselect that one first. Select this one. Go back to Move, and I can put this one up here like so. Turn off Move, deselect this one. And this way, so one other little time-saving feature here. Let's say I just go ahead and select this one and just delete it. Hit the delete button. And then I select both of these and edit Copy and edit Paste and go back to Move, and there I get my 4 right away. So then let's see, just line that up a little bit better. Turn off Move, deselect these, and now notice they're on this side of the die. And if I go to, I go put this up here, put that there, construct, Boolean Subtract, and if I look at my work here, oh, one other thing, and this is where it's starting to get a little tricky. I want to select all of those. So I guess the easiest way to do that would be like so. Now that there's more spots, it becomes a little more tricky. And change surface, spot, okay. And deselect these. And there we go. Okay, and then to make the 5 spot is actually very easy. If we then go back over here, and I select these, all 4 of them, I can then go to Modify, Move, and I can put those back there. And I'll use the right-hand quadrant to line those up nice and good. And so that's another 4. And so then basically I can turn off Move, deselect all of these, and I can select one of them, let's say. And I can go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste, and go back to Move. And this one I will put in the center. And turn off Move, deselect. And so if you look at the finished product so far, there it is. And if I go here and do a construct, Boolean Subtract, wonderful. And of course, once more, I select all of those. And now I've got to get rid of these because, well, actually it doesn't matter at this point, but we just want to select those, change surface, spot, and there we go. And then that leaves us with only one more surface. And so if we look at all the other spots, so basically on the opposite side of the 5 is the 1. So it's going to be a little bit easier to do it this way. I'm going to go over here, there, and I'm going to basically move these things in such a way that they're on the opposite side of the 1. So I'm going to select this first one here, and do a Modify, Move, and I'm going to put this up here, and I'm going to move it over here to the back. Then I'm going to deselect it. I'm going to grab another one. Deselect the whole thing. Grab another one. Move. And it's probably easier to move it there first. And down there, that would be the first part of the 3. Deselect it here. Select another one. And move out here like so. And somehow got off into outer space there, but we'll put that back. And that's close enough. Okay, and then once again, make sure that that is lined up with these others. Okay, and once again, I'm going to deselect that. And I'm just going to save some time by getting rid of these, delete, and basically highlighting these. And I'm going to do an edit, copy, edit, paste, and then I'm just going to move those over to there and deselect them, all of them. And then I'm going to go to the foreground and put those in the background and do a construct Boolean Subtract. And let's see how it handles that. And if it works, I should have a completed die. So in this particular case, it's going to be a little bit difficult to find out where all those are. So I'm going to assume that this will be the first one. Nope, that's not it. It's possible to lose track, so let's go over here and select these. Those are them. So I change surface and make those spot. At this point, I no longer need these, so I just get rid of them altogether. Don't select any of them, so they're all selected. And so if I go back here, I have a finished product. Okay, so at this point, the first thing we're going to do is save the model. So if I go here, File, Save Object, and that should give me the window telling me where it wants me to save it. I'm going to put it on the desktop, and I'm just going to call it dice because I don't like writing the word die. So I hit save, and there it is. Now when we go to layout, you see layout. Once again, we have an empty studio, so I'm going to put this into perspective view so we can see the lights and the camera. I'm going to import that into the studio. So if I load the object, and that will be the dice object, and there it is. And so, as we said before, we've got the 3 arrows that we can move it by: the red arrow, the green arrow, and the blue arrow. And in this particular case, if I zoom back from the studio, I see where the camera is pointing, and the camera can now look at this. And if I go into camera view, I see that it's looking at kind of an unflattering angle. So what I want to do is I want to make it so that I can see the dice as more dynamic. And so I'm selecting the dice. You can see it's still selected down here. If I go to Modify and Rotate, now I get the wheels. Now notice they're centered with the center of the die, which is actually very good. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tilt this in such a way that we see more of the features. And so let's say that we like that. Now here's where we can start having some fun. Now first of all, if you look at the die, you'll see we have some highlights and some shadows, of course. And the black spots, they look like black holes. So let's see if we can work on that a little bit. So if we go to the surface editor, the die only has 2 surfaces, but they're both very important. So let's say I start on spot that I created in the first place. What I want to do is I want to give that some specularity. If I turn up the specularity, you'll notice that the highlights begin to appear in the spot. Now notice the highlights look fragmented. Part of that is because the sphere is really made up of a series of flat planes. So what I want to do is I want to create the illusion that those are smoother. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on smoothing. Now if you're 3D printing this, you're not going to notice much of a difference. It's still going to look like that. You would have to actually create more geometry to fix that. But in this case, we can do it a little bit better. So smoothing, we can see that we got highlights there. We can also add some glossiness, which makes the highlights a little smaller. And we could also hypothetically change the color. Well, let's start with black at first. So let's say that for now, the spots look okay. Then we're going to go to the default surface, and let's say we want to stick with a kind of a white die, but we want to make that have more of a plasticky look. So we turn up the specularity, and that helps as well. And so let's have a look and see how that would. So as you can see, it rendered relatively nicely. And if I continue, we can see that that is what our shape looks like. You can see those highlights, and that's a good start to the project. Now let's say that I wanted to make the die look a little different. Let's say first of all I wanted to make it a colored die. So let's say I make it a red die. And so that gets us started here. But let's say I wanted to make it one of those transparent dies. So if I go to transparency and I start turning that up, you'll notice something very weird begins to happen. Now first of all, it's not like this would be completely impossible, but if you look at it, it doesn't look at all realistic. And there's a very important reason for that. That's because the insides of the die don't exist. They're all one-sided. So what I want to do is I want to create those insides. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn on double-sided. Now suddenly it begins to look a little bit better, the double-sided die. And so if I were to render that, let's see what we would get. So you see, now suddenly we have the illusion of those interior surfaces, and the die looks a little more realistic. Not quite perfect, but getting there. All right, so let's say if we're going to do this, normally the spots would be white. So let's try that. So if I go back to my surface editor and I go to my spots, I'm going to make those, instead of black spots, I'm going to make them white spots, or let's go with a complete white. And so there we have it. And so I'm going to also make those double-sided. And I'm also going to create the potential for reflections. So if I go to the default, and I'm going to turn on reflection, turn that up a little bit, so the interior surfaces will reflect each other. I'm going to turn that on for the spots as well, so the inside of the spots will have some reflection as well. So you see here we have something that doesn't look particularly good, but it does in fact demonstrate what you can do. So we can see through the die, we can see the reflections of each other, and I would say that the only way to save the general appearance of this thing would be to take away some of that excess reflection. So let's say we go here to the default surface, and let's say, well, rather the transparency. Let's make it, right now it's 60% transparent. Let's take that transparency down to like, let's say 10%. And let's see what that does. Okay, so there, the die actually looks better, but the transparency is completely gone. So let's try one more time. So for the default surface, I'm going to take the transparency up to, let's say, 23%. I'm making it even 25, how about? Okay, so we look here and I find this a whole lot more pleasing, a lot less confusing, maybe not perfect, but good enough for what we're trying to do now. So if I look at this as my finished product for today, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and save that. So do File, Save RGB, and I'm going to go ahead and choose PNG 32. And I'm just going to write red dice on the desktop. And you can see this is the product that I would send to my client to take a look at and see if I'm on the right track. Not perfect, but it would be at the start, and other things could be added later.